Hi, I'm Jeremy Brecker with the Labor Network for Sustainability, and this strike commentary is called Movement-Based Opposition, a Successful American Example. Can an alliance of social movements defeat racist legislation and authoritarian takeover? What happened a decade ago in North Carolina provides inspiration for what we need to do in the U.S. today. In the absence of adequate resistance in the electoral arena, an alliance of popular movements is functioning as the primary opposition to Trump's authoritarian rule. This movement-based opposition has emerged rapidly and is developing significant power as more and more people see and experience the harm the Trump administration and the MAGA Congress are inflicting on individuals, groups, and society as a whole. The movement-based opposition is using popular mobilization and nonviolent direct action to contest Trump's initiatives and build the power to counter them. In an unprecedented and unpredictable landscape, it is developed primarily through experimentation and must continue to do so. However, there are historical examples of movement-based oppositions from which we can learn. The Forward Together movement in North Carolina is one of them. In 2007, the North Carolina NAACP brought together a wide range of religious, labor, and justice organizations in a People's Assembly and passed a program that included the primary issues of each group. They began a series of campaigns to support local labor struggles, fight the right-wing takeover of school systems, expand voting rights, fight repressive legislation, and roll back a MAGA-style takeover of state government. Their underlying principle was that different constituencies would speak for themselves, but they all would support each other. Their experience illustrates how a movement based outside the electoral arena can nonetheless have a significant impact on government and on the electoral arena itself. Although a national movement faces problems different from those of a state movement, Forward Together has many lessons for today's national movement to protect society from MAGA authoritarianism. Forward Together faced a combined attack on democracy and on the well-being of people. Many people in North Carolina wanted to oppose that attack, but they were diverse, disconnected, and sometimes divided. The Democratic Party, although it was the official opposition, was not effectively opposing the authoritarian takeover, let alone expanding the realm of justice. Forward Together does not provide an off-the-shelf model, but it does show how an alliance of social movements can use organizing and direct action to change government and society. The story of what came to be called Forward Together is told by William Barber II, minister and at that time leader of the North Carolina NAACP. Barber is currently co-chair of the National Poor People's Campaign. In 2007, the North Carolina NAACP convened a People's Assembly with what it called the 14 Justice Tribes in North Carolina. The assembly, held on Jones Street outside the State House, unanimously adopted a 14-point agenda representing the concerns of those 14 tribes. It outlined 81 action steps. The People's Assembly became an annual event. The movement it spawned came to be known as Historic Thousands on Jones Street, or HK on J. HK on J chose as one of its first actions support of workers at the Smithfield hog butchering plant in Tar Heel, North Carolina, who had struggled for a decade to win a union. The coalition decided to change the narrative by making the workers' struggle a moral cause for our whole coalition. Barber wrote that conversations about fair wages or civil rights could not be reduced to the self-interest of separate groups. We were engaged together in a conversation about what kind of economy builds up the common good. The coalition organized clergy and community leaders to make public statements at grocery stores across the state, asking them to stop carrying Smithfield meats. After months of struggle, Smithfield recognized the union and agreed to a contract. The HK&J coalition's relationship to the state's beleaguered unions was solidified as well. More direct political action followed. A right-wing takeover of the Wake County School Board gutted guidelines promoting racial diversity and began to undermine public education. HK&J held forums to alert the public to what the board was up to and spoke at school board meetings. Our job was to shift the public conversation, Barber wrote. In response, the board banned protesters from its meetings. Barber says, like Bull Connor and Birmingham, they set the perfect stage for civil disobedience. Coalition members were repeatedly arrested for trying to enter the meetings. At the same time, they mobilized voters for the next election. A year later, every member of the school board who had tried to resegregate the schools was voted out, and the right-wing candidate for state superintendent of schools was defeated. HK&J's research indicated that the biggest reason low-income people didn't vote was because they couldn't leave their jobs to do so. In 2007, the coalition pressured the Democratic legislature and governor to pass a voting rights law to allow early voting and same-day registration. Then it mobilized its partner organizations for a voter registration and education campaign that added at least 185,000 new voters in the state. In 2008, all 15 of North Carolina's electoral college votes went to Barack Obama. In the 2012 election, a well-organized right-wing backlash took control of the North Carolina legislature and elected Pat McCrory governor. It passed new restrictions on voting rights, gay rights, abortion rights, environmental protection, unemployment compensation, medical care, and education, as well as other elements of the right-wing agenda. It passed a redistricting plan so gerrymandered that it was eventually blocked by federal courts as unjustifiably discriminating. A group of college students with duct tape over their mouths filled the legislature's observation area to protest voting rights restrictions and were arrested. HK&J decided to follow suit. On Monday, April 29, 2013, 17 protesters were arrested in the Legislative Gallery. The movement, soon to be rechristened Forward Together, decided to return in a week. Thus began North Carolina's nationally publicized Moral Mondays. Over the next 3 months, nearly 1,000 protesters were arrested at the State House. 80,000 people joined the movement's culminating demonstration. Barber called it a popular uprising. Many out-of-state organizations boycotted North Carolina. The NCAA banned holding national championships there. As the Moral Mondays movement grew, Governor McCrory's poll numbers fell. Before the 2016 election, Republicans tried to divide the movement, targeting black Christians in particular through the so-called bathroom bill, requiring that people use public restrooms matching their biological gender, a clear appeal to anti-trans bigotry. Barber and other ministers spoke at church meetings throughout North Carolina, saying that the fundamental principle of equal protection under the law was a constitutional and moral principle that had to be upheld. They pointed out that the bill wasn't about bathrooms at all. In fact, it attempted to codify discrimination, denied all North Carolinians the right to challenge employment discrimination in state courts, and overrode the victories of municipal living wage campaigns. Once they understood what the bill really did, Workers stood with preachers, and LGBTQ activists stood with the business community to oppose the bill. At the next election, McCrory became the first governor in North Carolina history to lose a bid for re-election. Forward Together eventually became a coalition of 145 organizations representing Christians, Muslims, Jews, non-believers, blacks, Latinos, poor whites, unionists and civil rights activists, feminists and environmentalists, doctors and the uninsured, and business people and the unemployed. It represented gay and straight, young and old, and documented and undocumented. This unity was based on a belief that none of us would be free until all of us were free. One principle that shaped Forward Together's actions was simply showing up to support any group in the state that was standing for justice. In 2013, Forward Together supported the fight of Planned Parenthood and NARAL against new abortion restrictions. A few years later, 100 people filled a Durham church to demonstrate solidarity with a Durham-raised asylum seeker fighting deportation. Forward Together sought powerful images of solidarity manifested in daily acts of justice and community building. Barbara writes that our most directly affected members would always speak to the issue closest to their own hearts, but they would never speak alone. The movement existed so preachers can fight for 15 and workers can say Black Lives Matter, so a white woman can stand with her black sisters for voting rights, so a black man can stand for a woman's right to health care, so LGBTQ folk can stand for religious liberty, so straight people can stand up for queer people, and the Muslim imam can stand with an undocumented worker. One journalist described the premise of the movement as a universalist program for health care, voting rights, reproductive choice, and higher wages, one beginning in building coalitions among people whom politics have driven apart. Amid a welter of issues, the defining common ground for Forward Together was a response to the needs of the poor and vulnerable. As Barbara put it, poor and hurting people were the capstone of our moral arch. Forward Together played some of the roles of an opposition political party, drawing together diverse constituencies around common interests, criticizing existing policies and institutions, and proposing alternatives. But it exercised power by direct rather than electoral action. Barbara said that effective work for justice in the real world requires real political power. Yet, the battle, while deeply political, wasn't fundamentally about campaigns and elections. More than winning seats in the legislature, it was about exposing the conspiracy of the governing elite to maintain absolute power through divide and conquer strategies, and reshaping the stories that tell us who we are. Unlike a political party or lobby, Forward Together eschewed running or supporting candidates for office, yet it transformed North Carolina politics. The most obvious application today of Forward Together's approach lies at the local and state level. Groups in more than 2,000 locations in every state participated in the massive hands-off May Day and No King's Day protests. Forward Together gives one example of ways to draw such people and organizations together into a powerful and effective opposition force. An opposition formed by an alliance of social movements outside the electoral arena, but impacting it through organization and direct action, will be critical for defeating the MAGA juggernaut, both locally and nationally.